The distress signal reached Camp Harrow at 2:14, punching through 3 layers of encryption that should have kept it sealed to fleet-level receivers. Colonel Maren Stahl was already awake. She had not slept well since the landing on Vecon 4, and she heard the raw feed before the comms officer had finished decrypting the header. A woman's voice, broken by static, speaking in clipped Terran standard with the cadence of someone who had rehearsed what she was about to say because she knew she would only get to say it once. This is Dr. Lena Ostrova, Chief Medical Officer, Terran Colonial Aid Station Mercy 7. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under direct military assault. Vithrani ground forces entered the compound at 1:47 local time. They have killed the security detail. They are executing staff. I have 17 wounded in the surgical ward. They are shooting patients in their beds. If anyone receives this, they are shooting patients in their beds. Mercy 7 is a medical facility. We have no weapons. We have no. The signal cut to static, then silence. Stahl stood at the edge of the comms tent, one hand on the aluminum frame, and listened to the silence for 6 seconds. Around her, the night shift of the 4th Terran Expeditionary Ground Force, 200 Marines in a forward operating base on the edge of a continent they had been surveying for 3 weeks, went still. The comms officer, Sergeant Hadley, looked up from his console with a face that had lost its color. "Ma'am, Mercy 7 is in the Korath Valley. That's 90 kilometers north of us. I know where it is. Colonel, the Vithrani aren't supposed to be within 400 kilometers of that valley. The Armistice Line. I know where the Armistice Line is." Stahl's voice was flat, not raised, not strained. The same register she used to read grid coordinates. "Get me Captain Morrow. Get me Lieutenant Commander Bryce. Get me every squad leader in this camp. Briefing in 8 minutes." She walked back to the command table and pulled up the terrain map of the Korath Valley. The holographic display threw pale blue light across the tent walls. Mercy 7 sat in the valley's western basin, a cluster of prefab medical modules arranged around a central trauma ward, surrounded by a low perimeter fence designed to keep local fauna out, not soldiers. The station had been established 4 months ago under the Vecon Accord, the agreement that had ended the first phase of hostilities between the Terran Expeditionary Command and the Vithrani Dominion. Under that accord, both sides had agreed to withdraw combat forces from a 50-kilometer buffer zone along the Korath River, and the Terran Colonial Authority had placed 3 medical aid stations inside the zone to treat civilian casualties, Vithrani civilians included. Mercy 7 was the largest. It had 42 staff. It treated burns, blast injuries, radiation exposure, and malnutrition. It had a pediatric wing for Vithrani children orphaned by the war. They had attacked it anyway. The briefing was held in the open air, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. Stahl stood at the head of the formation and spoke without notes. Her officers, 11 squad leaders, 2 platoon commanders, the logistics chief, the combat engineer section lead, stood in a half-circle around the holographic terrain map. At 1:47 this morning, Vithrani ground forces attacked Terran Colonial Aid Station Mercy 7 in the Korath Valley. The station is a registered medical facility operating under the Vecon Accord. It has no military personnel beyond a 4-person security detail, which has been killed. The last transmission indicates that Vithrani soldiers are executing medical staff and killing patients in the surgical ward, including the pediatric wing. She let the word settle. Nobody moved. We are 90 kilometers from Mercy 7. The Vithrani force composition is unknown, but signal intercepts suggest at least 2 companies of Vithrani regulars, possibly a reinforced battalion. That puts them at 300 to 800 combatants with armored vehicle support. We have 212 Marines, no armor, and 6 utility transports rated for rough terrain. We are not a relief force. We are a ground survey detachment. We are also the closest Terran military unit to Mercy 7, by a margin of 6 hours. Captain Morrow spoke from the left side of the formation. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. Colonel, rules of engagement. The Vecon Accord authorized defensive action in response to direct military assault on protected facilities. Rules of engagement are standard. Weapons free on any combatant engaged in hostilities against medical personnel or patients. Combatants who surrender will be taken prisoner. Civilians are not targets. We are not them. She looked at the map. 90 kilometers of broken terrain, rocky highland, a river crossing, 2 ridgelines. In the utility transports, 4 hours minimum. 4 hours during which the people at Mercy 7 would be dying. We move in 15 minutes. Full combat load. Every Marine in this camp. Leave the support staff to hold the fob. Questions? Lieutenant Commander Bryce raised a hand. Ma'am, we don't have medevac capability for a force engagement of this size. If we take casualties. We will take casualties, Commander. I know, move. The camp mobilized in 11 minutes. Nobody needed to be told twice. The Marines had heard the distress signal on the camp's overhead speaker, had heard the woman's voice break as she said they are shooting patients in their beds, and they were already moving before the briefing ended. 212 Marines loaded into 6 utility transports, open-topped cargo haulers with reinforced suspension, designed for moving survey equipment, not for combat insertion. The Marines had adapted them. Welded plate steel from the survey depot along the sides for fragmentation protection, mounted the 2 crew-served weapons from the fobs, perimeter defense on improvised rail mounts over the driver's compartments. The modifications would not survive a direct hit from V-Thrani plasma weapons, but they would stop fragments and small arms, and nobody in the 4th Expeditionary was interested in waiting for better options tonight. The convoy moved in single column along the survey road, running without tactical lights, guided by terrain-following sensors and Stahl's hand signals from the lead vehicle. The night pressed close around them. Vecon 4 had 2 moons, both small, both behind the ridgeline, and the only light came from the stars and the pale glow of the tactical displays. The Marines rode in silence, broken only by the grinding of engines and the crack of vegetation under the tires. There was nothing to say. The distress signal had said everything. Stahl rode in the lead vehicle, standing behind the driver's compartment with a tactical display strapped to the rail. The terrain was rough, fractured basalt plains cut by drainage channels, low ridges of volcanic rock, clumps of fibrous alien scrub that crunched under the tires. The transports bounced and lurched over ground that had never been designed for this kind of speed under this kind of weight. The Marines held on and said nothing. In the second vehicle, Morrow's platoon was checking magazines and adjusting equipment with the focused quiet of professionals who understood what was coming. In the third, Bryce's combat engineers were rigging breaching charges with practiced efficiency. In the 4th vehicle, the medical section, 4 combat medics, all the 4th Expeditionary had was organizing trauma kits and rehearsing triage protocols in the bouncing dark. In the 5th and 6th, riflemen sat shoulder to shoulder in the cargo beds, packs between their knees, faces lit intermittently by the glow of tactical displays as squad leaders shared the terrain data for the approach. The convoy ground north through the highland, headlights cutting through a darkness that smelled of sulfur and alien vegetation. The night was cold. Vecon 4 thin atmosphere bled heat fast after sunset, and the Marines' breath came in pale clouds. Nobody complained. Nobody asked where they were going or what they would find when they got there. The distress signal had told them everything they needed to know. The V-Thrani Dominion had occupied the northern continent of Vecon 4 for 11 years. They controlled 28 star systems across 3 sectors. Their military doctrine, the doctrine of assured primacy, held that territorial claims were established by military presence and maintained by the willingness to use force against any challenge. They had used this doctrine to annex 14 habitable worlds over the past century, displacing or subjugating the indigenous populations of each. They had looked at the medical stations in the buffer zone and made a calculation. Destroy one. Demonstrate that the armistice line was paper. Force the Terrans to negotiate a revised border that gave the Dominion control of the Korath Valley and its mineral deposits. The calculation assumed that the Terran response would be diplomatic, protests, sanctions, and appeal to the Galactic Mediation Council. The calculation did not account for a colonel in a cargo truck. At 300, while the convoy was threading a narrow pass between two basalt ridgelines, the comms officer patched through a second intercept. A Vithrani ground command frequency, partially encrypted. The translation software caught fragments. Medical compound secured. 41 neutralized. Continuing clearance of lower ward. Pediatric subjects relocated to processing area. 41 neutralized. The station had 42 staff. Processing area. Stahl knew what that meant in Vithrani military terminology. The pediatric patients, the children, had been separated and moved to a holding area where they would be cataloged and used as leverage. Private First Class Corps, a 23-year-old from Mumbai who had joined the survey detachment because she wanted to study alien geology, was staring at the floor of the transport with her hands white-knuckled on her rifle stock. Staff Sergeant Akoro, a career Marine who had served 2 prior combat deployments, was checking his ammunition count for the 4th time. The words 41 neutralized sat in the vehicle like a physical weight. 41 people. Doctors, nurses, technicians, administrative staff. People who had volunteered to work in a medical station in a buffer zone on an alien world because they believed in the principle that wounded people should be treated regardless of which side they were on. 41 of them were dead because a military headquarters 60 kilometers away had decided their hospital was inconvenient. Stahl opened a channel to all 6 vehicles. All units, this is Stahl. Intercept confirms Mercy 7 staff have been killed. Vithrani forces are holding pediatric patients in a processing area within the compound. Our objective has 2 phases. Phase 1, secure the pediatric ward and extract surviving patients. Phase 2, neutralize all hostile forces in the compound. Phase 1 is the priority. We do not leave those children in that building. Acknowledge. 6 acknowledgements came back, clean, sharp. At 3:47, the convoy crossed the Korath River at a shallow ford that the survey teams had charted 2 weeks earlier. The water was chest-deep on a standing marine, but the transports had sealed drive compartments and high ground clearance. They churned through in 4 minutes, water spraying over the sides, Marines holding their weapons above their heads. The current was stronger than the survey data had indicated. The seasonal rains had swollen the river, and the 3rd transport slewed sideways for a heart-stopping moment before its wheels found traction on the far bank. On the far side, Stahl checked the convoy, all 6 vehicles intact, all 212 Marines accounted for. The temperature had dropped sharply. The alien vegetation on the north bank was coated in a thin layer of frost that crunched under the tires, and the Marines' breath came in pale clouds under the headlights. Between 400 and 500, the convoy climbed the central highland, switchbacks cut into volcanic rock. The transports were not designed for this gradient with full combat loads. The engines labored. One vehicle overheated and required a 10-minute halt while the driver purged the cooling system. Stahl used the halt to check the tactical feed. No new intercepts from Mercy 7. The silence was worse than the transmissions had been. Silence meant the Vithrani had finished what they were doing, or it meant the last people capable of transmitting were dead. Either way, it meant the 4 hours were not fast enough, had never been fast enough, and every minute of the drive was a minute subtracted from someone's life. Stahl did not allow that calculation to change her speed. She could not drive the transports faster than the terrain allowed. She could not make 90 kilometers shorter. She could do exactly one thing: arrive, and then make the people who had done this understand the cost of the calculation they had made when they looked at a hospital full of doctors and children and decided it was an acceptable target. At 4:15, another intercept came through on a V-Thrani logistics frequency, unencrypted, a supply officer requesting additional restraint equipment for the processing manifest. 14 pediatric subjects, 9 adult subjects. He used the word subjects the way a quartermaster uses the word crates. The convoy reached the northern ridgeline overlooking the Korath Valley at 5:47, just as the first light of Vekhan 4 pale yellow sun broke over the eastern horizon. Stahl dismounted and moved to the ridge crest beside Sergeant Cade, her lead scout, who had moved ahead on foot an hour earlier. Mercy 7 sat in the western portion of the valley. The prefab modules were white walls, white roofs, marked with the red cross of the Terran Medical Authority. Some of them were burning. Thin columns of smoke rose from the northern wing, pale gray against the brightening sky. Vehicles, V-Thrani armored personnel carriers, squat and angular, painted in the olive and black camouflage of the Dominion's regular army, were parked around the perimeter. Stahl counted 8. She scanned the compound through the magnification scope. The main entrance was breached, the low fence torn open, the gate crushed flat by a vehicle. Bodies lay near the entrance. Medical staff. She counted 4. Inside, V-Thrani soldiers moved between the modules in organized patterns, fire teams of 4, professional. This was not a militia action. This was a planned military operation by the V-Thrani Dominion's regular forces against a medical facility that had been treating their own children. Cade's voice was low. I count approximately 300 on the ground, 8 APCs, 2 command variants with extended antenna arrays. Heavy weapons, crew-served plasma repeaters on the rooftops of modules 3 and 7. They've dug in, ma'am. They're fortifying. 300 V-Thrani regulars dug in with armor and crew-served weapons. Against 212 Terran Marines with personal weapons, no armor, no air support. The math was unfavorable. Stahl did not care about the math. She drew the plan in the dirt with the tip of her combat knife, because the holographic display was too bright and would be visible from the valley. First Platoon, Morrow Eastern, approach through the riverbed. Your objective is the pediatric module on the southeast corner. You breach, you clear, you hold. Nobody gets into that building after you. Second Platoon, Bryce, you're the hammer. North, straight down this slope. Hit the command vehicles first. Take out their comms, then sweep west. I'll take headquarters section and combat engineers through the western drainage channel. We hit the crew-served positions on the rooftops. Once those are down, we own the high ground. Timeline 6:15. Morrow, you're in position by 6:10. Bryce, you hold until you hear Morrow's breach. I go simultaneous with Bryce. She looked at each of them. Those are our people in that station, and there are children in that building, and we are going to get them out. Understood? Understood, Colonel. The next 28 minutes were the quietest of Stahl's career. She moved through the western drainage channel with 46 Marines and 6 combat engineers, single file, boots in 6 inches of alkaline water that smelled of copper, the morning light growing brighter above the channel walls. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the soft crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant crack of gunfire from the compound, single shots, spaced apart, methodical. Execution shots. Someone in Mercy 7 was still dying. She counted the shots. 7 in 28 minutes. Each shot tightened something in her chest, not panic, not rage, but a cold compression, a narrowing of everything she was into a single functional point. She had felt it before. It was the feeling of a person who had moved past grief into the territory beyond it, where the only thing left was the work. At 6:10, Morrow's voice came through her earpiece. First Platoon in position. Eyes on the pediatric module. I count 6 guards exterior, 2 on the door. Interior count unknown. I can see movement through the windows, small figures. The children are alive. Hold for my mark. At 6:13, Bryce reported from the ridgeline. Second platoon set. I have line of sight on the command vehicles. 2 APCs clustered. I can hit both with the opening salvo. Hold. Stahl checked her chrono. 2 minutes. She positioned her engineers at the channel's exit point, 30 meters from the western wall. The crew-served weapon on Module 7's rooftop was directly above them, a plasma repeater manned by a 2-man team, scanning the northern approach. They had not looked west. The drainage channel was not on their threat map. Stahl checked her chrono. 2 minutes. She positioned her engineers at the channel's exit point, 30 meters from the western wall. The crew-served weapon on the Module 7 rooftop was directly above them, a plasma repeater manned by a 2-man team, scanning the northern approach. They had not looked west. The drainage channel was not on their threat map. At 6:15, Stahl spoke one word: execute. The compound came apart in 11 seconds. The precision of the assault was not rage. It was the opposite of rage. It was the cold, mechanical application of force by professionals who had been given a reason to use every gram of skill they possessed. Bryce's second platoon opened from the ridgeline with concentrated fire on the command vehicles. Both APCs detonated. Their thin upper armor was not designed for directed kinetic energy at 200 meters. The blast killed the V-Thrani command section and sent a shockwave through the northern perimeter. Before they could recover, second platoon was already moving down the slope, firing in disciplined pairs. Simultaneously, Stahl's engineers blew the western wall with shaped charges. Stahl went through the breach first, her rifle up, and put 2 rounds into the legs of the nearest V-Thrani soldier before he could turn. Behind her, the combat engineers stormed Module 7's external staircase and hit the plasma repeater crew on the roof. 2 bursts. The weapon went silent. Within 30 seconds, the second crew-served position on Module 3 was neutralized. Morrow's breach of the pediatric module was the action that would stay with Stahl for the rest of her life. First platoon hit the southeast wall with a double breach, 2 entry points, 4 Marines through each. The 6 exterior guards went down in the first exchange. The 2 door guards were dropped before their weapons came level. Inside, the pediatric module was a single large room, 60 meters by 20, lined with small beds, the walls painted with bright murals of animals. 14 V-Thrani children were seated on the floor in the center, surrounded by 8 V-Thrani soldiers who had arranged them in a tight cluster. The soldiers had their weapons oriented inward. In V-Thrani military doctrine, secured assets were guarded with weapons pointed at the cargo. It did not matter what the protocol was. It looked like what it looked like. Morrow's Marines cleared the room in 9 seconds. 8 soldiers, 8 controlled engagements, 6 killed, 2 surrendered, not 1 round struck a child. When the shooting stopped, the room was silent except for the breathing of 14 small beings who had been pulled from their hospital beds, watched their doctors die, been marched to a holding area, and surrounded by armed soldiers. They were sitting exactly where they had been placed, motionless, their eyes wide, their small hands gripping each other. Corporal Yale Chen, the first Marine through the door, knelt beside the nearest child, a small V-Thrani girl with mottled gray skin and large amber eyes, and said, in halting V-Thrani she had learned from the phrase book, "Safe. You are safe. We are doctor's friends." The girl reached out and gripped Chen's forearm with both hands and did not let go. Stahl received Morrow's report, pediatric module secure, 14 children alive, no friendly casualties, and felt something unlock in her chest for exactly 2 seconds before she locked it down again. Phase 1 was complete. The fighting in the rest of the compound lasted 41 minutes. The V-Thrani recovered from the initial shock faster than expected, forming defensive clusters around the remaining APCs. The fighting was close, brutal, and room by room. Marines moved through prefab corridors past overturned gurneys, shattered medical equipment, walls spattered with blood. Each module had to be cleared room by room, corner by corner, in the close quarters discipline that Terran Marines drilled until it was reflex. The Vithrani fought hard. They were professional soldiers, well-trained and well-equipped, and they recovered from the shock of the three-pronged assault faster than Stahl had expected. The Vithrani held Module 4, the former operating theater, for 11 minutes, using surgical tables as cover and the theater's observation gallery as a firing position. A Vithrani lieutenant organized a counterattack from Module 6 with a barricade and crossfire that pinned 2nd Platoon for 8 minutes until Stahl's section flanked through ventilation ducts. A Vithrani sergeant led a flanking maneuver through service tunnels that killed Corporal Dietrich and wounded 2 others before the combat engineers cleared the tunnel with grenades. Stahl fought from the front. She moved through the compound with her headquarters section like a cutting edge, clearing rooms, directing fire, making decisions in 2-second intervals. She killed 11 Vithrani soldiers in the course of the engagement. Each one was aimed, controlled, necessary. She did not enjoy it. She did not hesitate. She did not think about it at all, except in the mechanical calculus of angles and distances and the time it took for a target to fall and the next doorway to appear. She had come up through the infantry, 12 years in the Terran Marine Corps, 6 in combat postings, 3 battlefield promotions earned in actions where her superiors were dead, and she was the one still standing, still making decisions, still moving the line forward. In Module 3, the Vithrani had set up a field command post. When Stahl's section breached, they found officers working over a portable command console. On the display, the operational orders for the Mercy 7 attack. She secured the console as evidence. The orders were specific. The 14th Division had been directed to neutralize Terran medical facility Mercy 7 as a precondition for territorial realignment in the Korath Valley sector. The authorization codes belonged to the Vithrani Dominion's continental command structure, not a rogue action. A policy decision, made by officers in a headquarters 60 kilometers away, to send 300 soldiers into a hospital and kill everyone inside, because its existence was inconvenient to a territorial claim. A subsection on asset recovery detailed the seizure of the pediatric patients, relocated to forward processing for repatriation leverage. 14 children, the youngest approximately 3 years old, designated as negotiating assets in a classified operational annex. Stahl read the subsection twice. Then she closed the datapad and walked through the compound in the full light of morning. The sun was above the ridge now, flooding the valley with pale yellow light that made the damage look worse, not better. The white walls of the medical modules were streaked with smoke and punctured with bullet holes. The red crosses, 4 of them, one on each face of the central module, were still visible, bright against the damaged walls. One of them had a bullet hole through the center of the cross. She looked at it for 5 seconds, then continued walking. The bullet hole was precise, centered, deliberate. Someone had aimed at the cross. She filed that detail alongside every other detail she had collected in the past 4 hours. She found Dr. Ostrova's body in the communications room. The chief medical officer had been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the head. The second shot was the execution shot. Her hand was still near the communications console. She had been killed while transmitting the distress signal or moments after. The woman who had rehearsed a distress call because she knew she would only get one chance, and who had used that chance to say they are shooting patients in their beds, not save us, not help, but a statement of fact that carried its own demand. Stahl memorized the face, then she moved on. Hadley's evidence teams documented everything, every body photographed, every weapon position marked. The command vehicle's data core extracted intact and sealed in an evidence container. The evidence would matter. Not for the Marines, they already knew what had happened, but for the Galactic Mediation Council, for the War Crimes Tribunal, for the historical record. The Vithrani had called this a territorial enforcement action in their operational orders. The evidence would call it what it was. At 6:56, the last organized resistance collapsed. Approximately 60 survivors surrendered in groups. Stahl's Marines disarmed them, restrained them, moved them to a holding area. The prisoners were given water. Their wounded were treated by the same Terran medics treating Terran wounded. The count took 2 hours. Mercy 7 staff, 42 total, 39 dead. 3 survivors, 2 nurses found hiding in a supply closet, 1 maintenance technician who had been outside the perimeter. 39 medical professionals killed, most by close-range gunfire, execution style. Dr. Ostrova's surgical team, 4 surgeons, 2 anesthetists, 3 surgical nurses, had been shot in the operating theater while performing surgery on a Vithrani child with blast injuries. The child was on the table. The surgeons were on the floor. The surgery was half completed. Patients 23 total. 14 Vithrani children recovered alive. 9 adult patients, 6 dead, killed in their beds. 3 survived with injuries. Terran casualties from the assault: 7 killed, 19 wounded. Private First Class Corps killed by a sniper while crossing an open compound. Staff Sergeant Okoro, both legs shattered by a mine, still directing his fire team from the ground until the medic reached him. Corporal Benitez shot through the chest while pulling a wounded Marine from a crossfire. Corporal Dietrich, Private First Class Ewan, Lance Corporal Sadik, Sergeant Torres, 7 names she would carry, 7 letters she would write. 7 families who would receive word that their son or daughter had died, taking back a hospital from the people it had been built to help. The Vithrani had sent 300 soldiers to destroy a hospital that was treating their own children. The irony was not lost on anyone. The fury was worse than the irony. General Aldrich Wren, commanding officer of all Terran ground forces on Vekhan 4, answered from Base Halcyon, 600 kilometers south. "Colonel, I've seen the preliminary reports. Give me your situation." She gave it, clean, numerical, complete. Wren was quiet for a moment. She could hear him processing the numbers: the 39 dead staff, the 6 patients killed in their beds, the children used as bargaining chips. She could hear him deciding. The Vithrani Dominion has not acknowledged the attack. Their diplomatic channels are claiming a rogue unit. "General, I have 8 armored personnel carriers with Dominion regular army markings. I have prisoners from the 14th Vithrani Ground Division, a frontline formation under direct Dominion command. Their operational orders were on the command vehicle's data core. The attack was planned, authorized, and executed under the Dominion's chain of command." "I know, CENTCOM knows. The authorization has already been issued." "Authorization for what, sir?" "Operation Reckoning, full ground offensive, every Vithrani military installation within the operational theater. The Vekhan Accord died when they walked into that hospital. Colonel, your unit leads." Stahl looked across the compound. In the pediatric module, Corporal Chen was sitting on the floor with 3 Vithrani children clustered around her, one of them still gripping her forearm. Chen was talking to them softly, her rifle slung across her back. "Understood, sir." Operation Reckoning was the systematic dismantlement of the Vithrani Dominion's military presence on the continent of Vekhan 4, and it ran on a clock. The clock was diplomatic. The Galactic Mediation Council would convene an emergency session within 72 hours. Once they convened, there would be motions for ceasefire, calls for investigation, pressure to negotiate. Some species had economic ties with the Vithrani Dominion. Some would argue the hospital attack was an isolated incident. Some would push for a resolution that left the Dominion's military infrastructure intact. General Wren had no intention of giving them that option. In 72 hours, before a single delegate sat down at the mediation table, there would be nothing left to mediate. The Vithrani Dominion's military presence on the continent of Vekhan 4 would be dismantled so completely that the ceasefire resolution would be academic. A ceasefire requires two sides capable of firing. 5 Vithrani military installations, 5 targets, 72 hours. Rules of engagement: military targets only, civilians protected, prisoners taken, medical facilities never targeted. The irony of that last rule was lost on no one. Stahl's unit was assigned Target 1, the 14th Division's forward operating base at Tesseract Ridge, the same division whose soldiers had attacked Mercy 7. She had requested it. Wren had approved without comment. Each target was assigned to a specific Terran ground unit. The operational order arrived at 14:30, and it carried the weight of institutional fury expressed in precise military language: grid coordinates, force allocations, logistics chains, medical evacuation plans. Everything by the book, everything clean, everything designed to dismantle a military infrastructure that had decided a hospital full of doctors was acceptable collateral damage in a land dispute. Target 1, Tesseract Ridge, T-68 hours. The 14th Division's FOB was a fortified position on a ridgeline 40 kilometers east. 1,200 Vithrani regulars, armored vehicles, defensive emplacements, underground bunkers, built to withstand a siege and never attacked. Stahl's reinforced company, 340 Marines now, bolstered by additional platoons and a section of 8 light armored vehicles from Base Halcyon, began the approach at 200 on the second day. They moved through terrain the survey teams had mapped during 3 weeks of work that now seemed like rehearsal. The approach was made in darkness, following routes the survey teams had charted: drainage channels, defilade positions behind ridgelines, dead ground invisible to the FOB's observation posts. Every meter of the approach had been walked by Stahl's Marines in the preceding weeks, catalogued and annotated in terrain reports that nobody had imagined would be used for an assault plan. Stahl knew this ground. Her Marines had walked every ridgeline, charted every drainage channel. The survey mission had given them something invaluable. They knew the ground better than the people who held it. The assault began at 5:30 dawn, the same hour her Marines had hit Mercy 7. She had chosen the symmetry deliberately. Combat engineers breached the outer perimeter with directed charges. Light armor pushed through the gaps and engaged the Vithrani's fixed weapon positions at close range, drawing fire while the infantry moved through the drainage network below the ridge and emerged inside the perimeter, behind the defensive line, before the defenders understood the assault was coming from 3 directions. The fighting at Tesseract Ridge lasted 9 hours. The hardest sustained ground combat Stahl had ever commanded. The Vithrani 14th Division fought from prepared positions, from bunkers with reinforced overhead cover, from trenches dug into volcanic rock over months. Their defensive doctrine was layered. Outer emplacements provided interlocking fields of fire, while interior positions engaged any attacker who breached the outer ring. Stahl's Marines advanced methodically, clearing one position at a time, using engineers to breach bunkers and armor to suppress strongpoints. Each bunker approached under cover, breached, cleared, secured. The Vithrani held fire until attackers were close, then engaged at ranges where their plasma weapons were most effective. The Terran advantage was precision and adaptability. Each squad found angles the defensive plan had not anticipated, exploiting the survey team's knowledge of terrain the Vithrani had assessed as impassable. The process was grinding, deliberate, and expensive. Each position contested, each meter of ground paid for. The Vithrani did not yield easily. Their soldiers held with the discipline of a professional military that had never been driven from a fortified position and did not intend to start now. But the Terrans had something the Vithrani's defensive calculations had not accounted for: a knowledge of the terrain that went down to the individual rock formation, the individual drainage channel, the individual fold in the ground where a fire team could approach unseen. 3 weeks of survey work turned into 3 dimensions of tactical advantage. By midday, the outer perimeter had fallen. 2 of Stahl's 8 armored vehicles were knocked out, one to an anti-armor weapon that killed the gunner, one to a buried mine. The crews survived. The vehicles did not. The cost of taking the outer perimeter was written across the ridgeline in craters, collapsed bunkers, and the bodies of Marines and Vithrani soldiers lying where they had fallen in the close-range fighting. The inner ring was harder. Veteran units fought from prepared positions with interlocking fire, each position sighted to create killing zones that covered every approach. The Vithrani's best troops were concentrated here, career soldiers who understood that a defensive position is only as strong as the soldier's willingness to hold it, and who held it with a ferocity born of professional pride and the knowledge that losing the ridge meant losing everything the 14th Division had built on this continent, forcing advances through killing zones. By mid-afternoon, the line broke. 21 Marines killed, 47 wounded. Each name came through Stahl's earpiece, the unit, the wound, the finality. She held each one and did not stop moving forward. By evening, approximately 300 remaining defenders had sealed themselves in the underground bunker complex. Stahl positioned her forces around every entrance. Commanding Officer, 14th Vithrani Division. This is Colonel Maren Stahl. Your perimeter is gone. Your defensive positions are destroyed. You are surrounded with no reinforcement coming. I am offering you one opportunity to surrender. Your wounded will receive medical treatment. You have 30 minutes. 28 minutes of silence. Then the main blast door ground open. 312 soldiers surrendered. They filed out in columns, hands raised, weapons left behind in the bunkers. The column took 11 minutes to clear the entrance. 312 soldiers walking out of the mountain they had been told was impregnable, squinting in the late afternoon light, looking at the Terran Marines who stood in the positions their defensive doctrine had said could not be taken. Among them was Colonel Vekath, the officer whose signature was on the operational order for the attack on Mercy 7. Stahl stood 20 meters from the bunker entrance and watched Vekath emerge, tall for a Vithrani, with campaign markings of a 30-year veteran. He stopped in front of her. She let him see the face of the woman who had driven 90 kilometers in the dark to take back what he had destroyed, and who had then come 40 kilometers more to take everything he had left. Process the prisoners. Colonel Vekath is to be separated and held for transfer to war crimes proceedings. Target 1 complete, T-minus 59 hours. The other 4 Terran ground units were already moving. Target 2, the Vithrani supply depot at Koros Basin, fell to the 7th Expeditionary in 6 hours. 700 underground storage bunkers, 16 fuel distribution points, 3 ammunition magazines. Enough munitions and provisions to sustain Vithrani operations for 8 months. Its destruction meant the Dominion's remaining forces had no resupply chain. What they had on hand was all they would ever have. Every armored vehicle without fuel. Every weapon without ammunition. Every soldier without rations beyond what they carried. The supply depot had been the foundation of the Dominion's operational capability on the continent, and the 7th Expeditionary had removed it from existence in 6 hours. The depot burned for 2 days, the smoke visible from orbit. Target 3, the communications relay on Mount Vekhan, was taken by the 12th Special Operations Detachment in a nighttime raid. 32 operators infiltrated through a maintenance tunnel, neutralized 47 signals personnel without a shot fired, stun weapons, zip ties, speed, and destroyed every piece of communications equipment. The SOD operators moved through the relay complex like a precision instrument, each room entered, each technician restrained, each piece of hardware identified, tagged, and disabled in sequence. The entire operation took 47 minutes from first entry to final confirmation that the relay was dark. The relay had been the nervous system of the Dominion's military presence. When it went dark, every Vithrani unit was isolated, blind, cut off from the chain of command that had ordered the hospital attack. Target 4, the 9th Division barracks at Dallon Flats, was the largest remaining formation. 2,000 soldiers, heavy armor, artillery. General Verk, the division commander, had never lost a defensive engagement. The 2nd Terran Armored Battalion hit them at dawn on the 3rd day. Electronic warfare specialists jammed internal communications in the first 3 minutes. Each defensive sector fought alone, and each was overwhelmed in sequence. Verk attempted to negotiate conditions, territorial concessions in exchange for laying down arms. Colonel Park transmitted one sentence, in the same flat register that had become the unofficial tone of Operation Reckoning, unconditional, 30 minutes. The 9th Division surrendered in 22. Verk emerged from his command bunker in full dress uniform and handed his sidearm to Colonel Park without a word. Stahl received each update on her tactical display, marking each target's status with a check mark. A target was either checked or it was not. No ambiguity, no partial credit. The list was getting shorter. It was the same notation she used for everything: maintenance schedules, supply manifests, target lists. There was a clarity to the system that she valued. A target was either checked or it was not. There was no ambiguity, no partial credit, no room for the kind of interpretive flexibility that had allowed the Vithrani to call the destruction of a hospital a territorial enforcement action. A check mark meant done. Target 5, Vekon Prime, the Dominion's continental headquarters. 1,500 soldiers, the command staff, fortified underground complex, the heaviest defenses on the planet. General Wren assigned it to Stahl. He did not ask if her unit was capable. He had read the reports from Mercy 7 and Tesseract Ridge. He knew what she had done with 200 Marines in cargo trucks and what she had done with 340 against 1,200 entrenched defenders. The math said she should not have been able to do either. The math did not account for what happens when a ground commander hears gunfire on a medical frequency and decides that the distance between her and the sound is a problem she intends to solve. The approach took 12 hours, a forced march across 60 kilometers through the night. Stahl walked with them. She did not ride in the armored vehicles. She walked, carrying her own pack, her own rifle, setting the pace from the front, because a colonel who asks exhausted Marines to march through the night owes them the courtesy of walking the same ground. At the bivouac point halfway through, her Marines worked in firelight. Chen was writing Vithrani phrases in a notebook, words the children at Mercy 7 had taught her during the handoff to the medical relief team. Akora was taping the splint on his fractured fingers tighter. He had broken them during a tunnel breach at Tesseract Ridge and fought 6 more hours before reporting the injury. Mara walked the perimeter, talking to squad leaders in the low murmur of a platoon commander who understood his people needed to see him moving. She saw no hesitation. They knew there was one more name on the list. Her Marines had been in continuous operations for 3 days. They had taken casualties, 28 killed, 63 wounded across Mercy 7 and Tesseract Ridge. They had marched, fought, consolidated, and prepared to march again. They were exhausted in the bone-deep way that only sustained combat produces, the kind of fatigue that lives in the tendons and the joints and the backs of the eyes, that makes the hands slow and the vision narrow and the simplest decisions feel like they are being made through water. None of that mattered. There was one more name on the list. The march continued through the night. River crossings in the dark, a narrow pass where the column went single file for half a kilometer, a stretch of volcanic field where the ground was sharp enough to cut boot soles. Stahl felt every kilometer in her legs, in her back, in the arm that had caught a fragment of shrapnel at Tesseract Ridge and was wrapped in a field dressing she had not had time to change. She did not stop. None of them stopped. The march continued because it had to continue, because the clock was still ticking. Halfway through, Private Holloway collapsed from dehydration. The medics stabilized him and loaded him onto an armored vehicle. Stahl acknowledged the report and did not slow the pace. At 400 on the fourth day, 6 hours before the Galactic Mediation Council's emergency session, Stahl's forces reached the approaches to Vecon Prime. 3 things had changed since the operation began. The Vithrani had no communications network. The garrison had been reduced to approximately 1100, and the Vithrani did not know she was coming. The assault began at 500. Engineers blew 3 sections of the outer wall simultaneously, charges placed during the final hour of darkness by teams that had crawled to within 20 meters without being detected. Light armor drove straight for the motor pool. Infantry came through flanking breaches in 2 columns, hitting interior positions from angles the garrison had not fortified against. The Vithrani fought blind and fierce. Without communications, each defensive sector operated independently, unable to coordinate. Stahl exploited this ruthlessly, concentrating force against one sector at a time while keeping the others pinned. Each sector believed it was bearing the main assault. Each fought alone. By 700, the outer ring had fallen. By 800, the inner perimeter was breached. The last above-ground resistance held the headquarters building for 40 minutes. By 900, Stahl's Marines were in the underground complex itself, clearing tunnels and command rooms in close quarters combat measured in meters and heartbeats. The Vithrani command staff, 16 officers, including the Continental Commanding General, barricaded themselves in the central operations room at the deepest level of the complex. Outside the blast door, the sounds of fighting echoed through concrete corridors that smelled of cordite and ozone from discharged plasma weapons. Stahl stood outside the blast door of the central operations room. Her left arm was bandaged where a grenade fragment had caught her forearm during the tunnel clearing. The wound was bleeding through the dressing. She keyed the Vithrani frequency. "Commanding General, your headquarters is taken. All 5 of your military installations are in Terran hands. You have no reinforcements, no communications, no escape. Surrender now. You have 5 minutes." The door opened in 3. Supreme Commander Drethal emerged, 60 Vithrani years old, immaculate uniform despite the siege, face rigid with discipline. He looked at Stahl, a human woman of average height, covered in dust and dried blood, left arm wrapped in a soaking field dressing, rifle on her right shoulder. "You are the one who took back the medical station." "I am." "And the ridge?" "Yes." "How many soldiers do you have?" 310. Something shifted behind his eyes. 310 against 1,500. After 2 prior engagements in 3 days. "The number doesn't matter, Supreme Commander. You sent soldiers into a hospital. They killed doctors who were treating your own people's children. They shot patients in their beds. They executed a woman while she was calling for help on a radio. The number was always going to be whatever number walked through your door." Drethal looked past her at the Marines, the battered armor, the faces of soldiers who had marched 60 kilometers through the night. "I understand," he said quietly. Stahl did not respond. Understanding was not her objective. Her objective was the list, and the list was complete. 5 targets, 72 hours, all 5 Vithrani military installations neutralized, taken, dismantled. The Dominion's ability to project military force on Vecon 4 reduced to 0. 5 targets, 72 hours, all 5 Vithrani military installations neutralized. The attack on Mercy 7 answered not with a single retaliatory strike, but with the systematic erasure of every military asset the aggressors possessed, until the list was empty and the clock had not yet run out. The Galactic Mediation Council convened 6 hours later. The Vithrani delegation arrived to propose a ceasefire and discovered there was nothing left to ceasefire. At Base Halcyon, General Wren convened a briefing. Total Terran casualties across all 5 targets, 112 killed in action, 308 wounded. Every name was read aloud. Every name was someone who had fought to answer what the Vithrani had done to a hospital full of doctors and children. The room was silent through the reading. 112 names. It took 8 minutes. The next morning, Stahl stood behind General Wren in a conference room with high windows that let in the yellow light of Vecon 4 sun. The Vithrani delegation, 5 senior officials, sat across the table. They had prepared terms, compromises, conditions. They had expected diplomats. Wren spoke for 3 minutes. He laid out the facts, presented the evidence from the 14th Division's data core, and delivered the terms. Full withdrawal, surrender of all officers in the chain of command, permanent demilitarization of the buffer zone, reparations. Mercy 7 rebuilt, 2 additional stations constructed, all under permanent Terran protection. The lead diplomat began to speak about proportionality. Wren held up a hand. "Allow me to introduce Colonel Maren Stahl." Her unit responded to the distress signal. She led the assault that recovered the survivors. She then led the attacks on the 14th Division at Tesseract Ridge and on your continental headquarters. The diplomat looked at Stahl. Her left arm was in a medical brace. "These terms are not a starting point. They are the terms. Colonel Stahl's Marines took 5 of your military installations in 3 days. I have 12,000 more soldiers on this continent. The colonel is here so that you understand what kind of answer you received, and what kind of answer you would receive if you ever consider anything like this again." They signed the terms that afternoon. No ceremony, no speeches. The Vithrani officials signed, stood, and left the room without a word. Wren collected the documents, placed them in a secure case, and handed them to his aide. Stahl stood by the window and watched the Vithrani delegation cross the compound to their transport. The lead diplomat paused at the vehicle's hatch and looked back at the building, at the window where Stahl stood. Then he looked away and climbed inside. The signing was the end of a chain that had begun with a distress signal at 2:14 on a night 4 days earlier. 4 days. 96 hours from the moment Dr. Ostrova's voice had broken through the encryption to the moment the Vithrani delegation put their names on documents that surrendered their entire military presence on the continent. 4 days from a woman in a cargo truck hearing gunfire on a radio to the complete dismantlement of a military infrastructure that had taken the Dominion 11 years to build. In the weeks that followed, the terms were implemented with systematic precision. Vithrani forces withdrew in organized columns. The officers in the chain of command, 11 total, from Colonel Vekath to the platoon leaders who directed the executions, were transferred to Terran custody for war crimes proceedings. The buffer zone was expanded and permanently demilitarized. Terran engineering units began construction on 2 additional medical stations. The doctrine of assured primacy, the framework under which the Dominion had annexed 14 worlds and attacked a hospital to adjust a border, was not formally repudiated. It did not need to be. The doctrine assumed that territorial claims were maintained by the willingness to use force. The Terrans had demonstrated a willingness to use force that the doctrine's architects had not imagined was possible, not in scale, but in speed, and in the cold, systematic completeness with which it was applied. The galaxy took notice, not of the firepower could be matched, not of the tactics could be studied. They noticed the speed and the completeness. A ground survey detachment had answered a hospital attack by crossing 90 kilometers in 4 hours and retaking the facility at dawn. The same colonel had then led the destruction of every Vithrani installation on the continent in 72 hours. Species with territorial ambitions near human colonies noted the lesson. The answer had not been a diplomatic protest or a trade sanction. The answer had been a colonel in cargo trucks, driving through the dark with a list. The lesson was not about military capability. Every major species in the galaxy had armies. The lesson was about what happened when you gave a specific kind of person a specific kind of reason. The Vithrani had attacked a hospital. They had killed doctors. They had taken children. And a woman 90 kilometers away had heard a distress signal and decided that the only acceptable response was to drive through the night, take back the hospital, and then keep going until every military installation on the continent was a pile of rubble and every officer in the chain of command was in custody. Not because she was ordered to, she had started before any order was given. Because she heard gunfire on a medical frequency and could not be the kind of person who did not respond to that sound. That was the thing the cost-benefit calculations never accounted for. The Vithrani had weighed the strategic value of a hospital against the political cost of its destruction and decided the numbers worked. They had not included in their calculations the variable of a woman who would hear a distress signal and decide, in the time it took to listen to 6 seconds of silence, that the correct response was to load 200 Marines into cargo trucks and drive 90 kilometers through the dark. The variable was not military capability. The variable was what Maren Stahl could not live with, and what she could not live with was the sound of gunfire in a hospital ward, unanswered. 6 months later, the rebuilt Mercy 7 opened its doors, larger than the original, a new pediatric wing, twice the size, with bright murals painted by Corporal Chen. The staff included 3 Vithrani physicians working alongside Terran medical teams. The red crosses on the white walls were the same. The transponder signal was the same. But there was a difference now, a company of Terran Marines stationed permanently at the perimeter, with orders that would never expire and rules of engagement that left no room for interpretation. No one would walk into this hospital again. Stahl attended the opening. She stood in the back in uniform and watched the first patients arrive, 2 Vithrani children with radiation burns, carried by their mother, who looked at the red crosses on the white walls and wept. The mother did not know who had taken the hospital back. She did not need to know. The hospital was open. The doctors were there. The red crosses on the white walls meant what they were supposed to mean again. A Vithrani journalist approached her afterward. "Colonel, some in the Dominion say the response was disproportionate, that the destruction of an entire military infrastructure was too much for one hospital attack." Stahl looked at the journalist. "It was not disproportionate, it was complete. There is a difference." She walked back toward the medical station, where the red crosses caught the morning sun, and the wards were filling, and no one would fire on them again. The distress signal that had woken her at 2:14 had been answered, not with speeches, not with resolutions, but with 200 Marines in cargo trucks driving through the dark toward the sound of gunfire, because a doctor on a radio had said they are shooting patients in their beds, and the only answer to that sentence was to go. The list was done, every name crossed off, every installation taken, every officer in the chain of command awaiting trial. That was the answer. It would not need to be given twice.